It began with a whisper, a rumor so incendiary that when it first surfaced, people refused to believe it. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, known worldwide for her elegance, poise, and now her royal controversies, was allegedly involved in something that would shock anyone who thought they knew her. 5 hockey players, one team, and the night that would define a hidden chapter of her life forever. What exactly happened? Was it a misunderstanding, exaggeration, or the truth that no one in the public eye had dared to speak aloud? The answer, according to Trevor Engelson, Meghan's former husband, is as explosive as it is scandalous. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scenario. Meghan, at the height of her Hollywood social life, moving through parties that glittered with stars and champagne. She was ambitious, magnetic, and yes, controversial. Trevor Engelson, the man who knew her in a way no one else could, claims to have insight into events that paint a side of Meghan the public has never seen. It's easy to judge celebrities from a distance, to categorize them as flawless or scandalous. But when you are privy to the private moments, the heartbreaks, the choices made behind closed doors, the picture becomes messier, more human, and far more compelling. Why does this story matter now, in 2026, years after Meghan's Hollywood days? The answer is simple: because the world still watches her every move. Every headline, every photo, every interview is dissected by millions. Royals, celebrity culture, and the public fascination with personal scandals have created a relentless cycle of intrigue. And yet, there are truths that remain buried, stories that no magazine or network dared fully explore until now. Trevor Engelson's revelations aim to pull back the curtain, exposing a narrative of desire, secrecy, and choices that ripple far beyond a single night or a handful of people. But let's be clear, this isn't just gossip. This is a story about human behavior, about power dynamics, about what it means to live a life under the scrutiny of the entire world. Meghan's alleged interactions with the 5 hockey players aren't isolated incidents. They are a window into Hollywood culture, the pressures of fame, and the way private decisions can explode into public scandal. The stakes are high, and the fallout could have been devastating for everyone involved. Now, you might be asking yourself, who were these hockey players? Why is it significant that they all played on the same team? And how did a private moment, allegedly involving a wet pants incident, become a talking point that reverberated through social media, tabloids, and whispered conversations alike? Each question opens another door. Each answer leads to more intrigue. It's a labyrinth of rumor, memory, and human error, and Trevor Engelson claims he holds the map. Let's step back for a moment. Before Meghan became a duchess, before the cameras followed her every step, she was navigating the Hollywood landscape like many young actors, ambitious, strategic, and unafraid to use her charm. Parties were not just social gatherings, they were opportunities. Networking, influence, and personal relationships all blended into a mix that could elevate a career or destroy it. And in this environment, it's no surprise that encounters happened, stories formed, and reputations were tested. But what makes this particular story so compelling is the proximity of all these elements. Trevor Engelson, 5 hockey players on the same team, and a series of nights that would become unforgettable to anyone involved. The alleged wet pants moment adds an unexpected layer to the narrative. At first glance, it seems trivial, even humorous. But consider the emotional stakes. A public or semi-public humiliation, magnified by gossip, amplified by rumors, and framed against the backdrop of Meghan's emerging celebrity. A single moment, a single incident, can define perceptions, shape narratives, and alter relationships forever. It's a reminder that behind the polished public image, there are human vulnerabilities that even the most poised individual cannot escape. Trevor Engelson's position in this story is crucial. As Meghan's ex-husband, he had access to details, experiences, and personal reflections that the public can only speculate about. His revelations are not just about scandal. They are about insight, about understanding the dynamics of Meghan's relationships before she became a global figure. He has spoken in interviews, dropped hints in conversations, and now, through this exposé, we are offered a window into moments that were private, intimate, and previously shielded from public view. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The story is not linear, and it is certainly not simple. There are contradictions, unexpected turns, and moments where what seems obvious is anything but. Allegations collide with personal recollections. Rumors intersect with public statements. And the truth, elusive as it may be, often lies in the tension between what was said, what was done, and what was observed. For viewers, this is the heart of the intrigue. The chance to sift through fragments of information and attempt to piece together a narrative that makes sense, all while being confronted with emotional beats, surprises, and shocking revelations. And here is where the curiosity gap becomes irresistible. What truly happened between Meghan and these 5 hockey players? Were these fleeting encounters, calculated interactions, or something else entirely? How did these nights shape her, influence her relationships, and perhaps even inform her approach to fame and public scrutiny later on? Each question builds tension, keeping you leaning forward, eager to hear the next piece of the puzzle. The cultural context also cannot be ignored. Society's fascination with celebrity scandal is insatiable. When Meghan Markle's name is attached to controversy, the public reacts with fascination, judgment, and debate. But it's easy to forget that behind every headline, there are complex human stories, decisions made in private, and consequences felt in public. This exposé does not merely aim to titillate. It seeks to illuminate the interplay between personal choices and public perception, between vulnerability and scrutiny, and between rumor and reality. Now, let's return to Trevor Engelson's perspective. Imagine being married to someone whose life is on the cusp of global attention, knowing the private details that could either explain or explode into scandal. The decisions he made in choosing what to reveal, how to frame the story, and when to speak out are not taken lightly. And as we explore the events leading to the infamous encounters with the hockey players, we see how trust, betrayal, and revelation intertwine, creating a narrative that is as compelling as it is shocking. By now, you may be wondering, is this all credible? How much of it is rumor? How much is documented? The answer lies not in any single fact, but in the convergence of accounts, observations, and insider testimony. The goal is not to vilify or judge, but to offer a comprehensive look at a chapter of Meghan Markle's life that has remained largely hidden from the public eye until now. And finally, the stakes are personal. For Meghan, these revelations are tied to identity, reputation, and relationships. For Trevor, they are tied to memory, reflection, and perhaps the need for closure. For the audience, they are tied to curiosity, intrigue, and the irresistible pull of a story that promises drama, scandal, and human complexity. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Trevor Engelson never imagined that one day he would be at the center of a story about Meghan Markle that the world would devour. For him, she was never just a public figure, never just a headline, never just the Duchess of Sussex. She was a partner, someone he had shared hopes, dreams, and private moments with, long before the cameras and gossip columns arrived. And yet, when he speaks about her now, there is a mixture of reverence, regret, and undeniable shock at the stories that emerged after their marriage ended. It all begins with perspective. Trevor's eyes, trained not by media but by personal experience, see layers of Meghan that the public never could. They see ambition intertwined with insecurity, charm mingled with strategy, and charisma often masking a hunger for influence and validation. She was magnetic, Trevor once said in an interview. And magnetic is the word that captures the way people, especially men, were drawn to her. But magnetism comes with a price, and in Meghan's world, that price was often hidden, paid in secrecy and whispered encounters. Imagine being in Trevor's shoes. You are married to someone whose life seems destined for extraordinary things, and yet behind closed doors, the private reality is far more complicated. There are nights filled with laughter, shared dreams, and intimacy. There are also nights where you catch glimpses of behaviors and interactions that leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. And then there are moments, small at first, that hint at a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Trevor claims that it was in these moments, subtle but telling, that he began to understand the trajectory Meghan's life was taking and the secrets she was keeping. One of the first things Trevor recalls about Meghan was her social savvy. She could enter a room and immediately command attention, not by shouting or demanding it, but by being present, engaged, and effortlessly captivating. It was a skill, a talent, and, as Trevor would later realize, a tool she wielded with precision. In Hollywood, where opportunity often hinges on influence and perception, Meghan's abilities were both her armor and her weapon. She could charm, persuade, and navigate complicated social landscapes with an ease that left others both impressed and intimidated. But charm, as Trevor observed, was not always genuine warmth. Sometimes it was a calculated move, a way to maintain control over situations and people. In relationships, this meant that what was visible on the surface, affection, care, shared laughter, was sometimes layered over a deeper strategy. Trevor describes feeling caught in a dual reality. The woman he loved intimately, and the woman navigating a world where appearances often mattered more than truth. This duality, he says, was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but over time, the cracks became impossible to ignore. One of the most striking insights Trevor provides is how Meghan interacted with men in her social orbit. Hollywood, as he explains, is a small world where interactions are magnified, reputations are fragile, and every smile or glance carries weight. Meghan's relationships with certain individuals were not just social. They were strategic, reinforcing her image, her influence, and her positioning in the Hollywood hierarchy. Trevor hints that among these interactions were encounters with figures that would later become infamous in their connection to the alleged hockey scandal. The details are complex, layered with nuance, and only someone with Trevor's perspective could attempt to unravel them. Trevor's accounts are also deeply personal. He describes moments of intimacy, times when trust was tested, and incidents that left him questioning Meghan's decisions and priorities. There is no joy in retelling these stories. There is a mixture of frustration, betrayal, and reflection. He recounts conversations that were never meant to leave the confines of their private life, decisions made late at night, and the subtle signs that hinted at actions beyond what he knew. Each memory, each reflection, is infused with emotion, giving the audience an insider's view that is both humanizing and unsettling. It is important to understand that Trevor's perspective is not meant to vilify Meghan, but to provide context. He paints a picture of a young woman navigating fame, opportunity, and personal ambition, often making choices that were morally ambiguous but understandable in the context of her environment. Yet, the stories he shares, particularly those that involve the alleged encounters with the hockey players, reveal the tension between personal desire, public perception, and private loyalty. They show a side of Meghan that few had access to, and even fewer could interpret accurately. Trevor also sheds light on the emotional impact of these events. He speaks candidly about jealousy, disappointment, and the sense of betrayal that emerged as he pieced together what had happened. There are nights he recalls lying awake, questioning whether the person he loved and married was the same person portrayed in rumors and gossip. The emotional stakes are high, not only because of personal hurt, but because of the broader implications for how Meghan would be perceived in the public eye. This, Trevor suggests, was the beginning of a long narrative that would eventually intersect with media coverage, royal scrutiny, and public fascination. One of the most compelling aspects of Trevor's account is his ability to place these events in context. He does not present them as isolated incidents, but as part of a pattern, a series of choices that, when viewed together, tell a story about ambition, desire, and strategy. He speaks about the nights that became critical junctions, the parties where dynamics shifted, and the subtle interactions that, in hindsight, carried enormous weight. It is in this context that the alleged encounters with the hockey players take on a new significance, transforming from rumor to narrative, from gossip to story. The narrative also highlights the tension between public and private life. Trevor frequently reflects on the challenges of being married to someone whose personal decisions could have such far-reaching consequences. How does one navigate a relationship when private actions could explode into global headlines? Trevor's reflections reveal a man attempting to reconcile love, loyalty, and his own moral compass with the complex reality of Meghan's life and choices. The emotional complexity is staggering, and it is precisely this complexity that makes the story so compelling. Trevor's perspective also adds credibility to otherwise sensational claims. His proximity to Meghan, the intimacy of their marriage, and his first-hand observations provide context that the public has never had. While media outlets may speculate, Trevor offers nuance, detailing both the choices Meghan made and the environment that shaped those choices. He is candid about his feelings, hurt, confusion, admiration, but never loses sight of the broader picture. The audience is invited not just to witness the events, but to understand the emotional and social context that produced them. Finally, Trevor's account ends with a tension that perfectly sets the stage for the next chapter. He hints at nights that were pivotal, interactions that were both intimate and strategic, and decisions that would later come to define Meghan's narrative. What happened next, he says, is something that no one expected, and it would change everything for all of us. It is a statement that demands attention, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, eager to hear the next piece of the story. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Meghan Markle's story didn't begin with royal headlines or global media scrutiny. It began in Hollywood, a world glittering with promise, full of ambition, power plays, and temptation at every turn. If you think you know Meghan from the cameras, think again. Before the tiaras, before the palace protocols, she was navigating a landscape where social survival depended on charm, strategy, and the ability to wield influence as effortlessly as she wore designer dresses. From the outside, Meghan's life seemed enviable. An actress on the rise, guest starring in television shows, attending parties filled with celebrities, producers, and powerful agents. But the reality behind the red carpets and the flashbulbs was far more complicated. Hollywood, Trevor Engelson later recalls, was a world where appearances were currency. One smile could open doors, one word could close them, and every relationship, professional or personal, had potential consequences that could ripple far beyond a single night. Meghan, even early in her career, understood this implicitly. She had charisma that turned heads, intelligence that drew people in, and a presence that few could ignore. But Trevor observed, and others who knew her confirmed, that beneath the surface lay a keen strategist. She could read a room, understand power dynamics instantly, and act in ways that maximized her opportunities. Some called it charm, others labeled it manipulation, but whatever the interpretation, it was undeniable. Meghan was a force to be reckoned with. And then there was the social world, the parties, the networking, the late-night gatherings that blurred the lines between professional ambition and personal indulgence. These were spaces where connections were made and reputations tested. For Meghan, who was eager to establish herself, these environments were both playground and battleground. Trevor often remarked that he marveled at her ability to navigate these nights, but he also saw the toll it took, the endless balancing act between image and reality, desire and discretion. Hollywood, of course, is also a world of rumors. And rumors, Trevor explains, are often rooted in tiny truths that expand into elaborate stories. Meghan, in her early days, was surrounded by men and women whose fascination with her could be flattering or dangerous. In this environment, relationships were rarely just about connection, they were about positioning. And it's in this context that the alleged interactions with the hockey players must be understood. These encounters were not random. They occurred in a world where opportunity, desire, and ambition constantly intersected. Trevor remembers nights when he would accompany Meghan to events and watch her in action. There was a magnetic energy in the way she moved through the room, engaging effortlessly with everyone from actors to producers to athletes. He describes how men were drawn to her, not just physically, but intellectually, emotionally, and socially. This wasn't superficial attraction. It was the pull of someone who could make you feel both important and unseen at the same time, a dangerous combination, particularly in a world obsessed with image and reputation. Some of Meghan's encounters were harmless social connections, yet others carried more intimate undertones. Trevor hints at the beginnings of what would later be the infamous story of her interactions with multiple men on the same hockey team. In hindsight, he says, the patterns were there, the late-night gatherings, the private conversations, the shared laughter that lingered just a little too long. These moments may have seemed trivial at the time, But as the narrative unfolds, they take on a new, far more significant meaning. Hollywood also offered Meghan freedom, a space to experiment with identity and relationships outside the scrutiny she would later face as a royal. But freedom comes with choices, and choices, in Trevor's eyes, have consequences. Nights of glamour, alcohol, flirtation, and fleeting intimacy were not unusual in her circle. But when those nights intersected with ambition and public perception, they had the potential to become explosive. And for Meghan, it seems that some of these choices would later reverberate in ways she could never have anticipated. Yet Trevor is careful to emphasize nuance. Meghan was not reckless, she was strategic. She understood the power of perception, of influence, and of attention. She knew which moments to own, which to downplay, and which to let unfold without interference. In her early Hollywood days, this balance was delicate. One misstep could harm her career, her reputation, or her relationships. Trevor recalls instances where he saw her charm turn a potentially awkward encounter into an advantage, a move that was both impressive and, in his words, frustrating for anyone trying to read her. Even in this world of parties and professional maneuvering, Meghan's private life remained complex. Her relationship with Trevor was intimate, filled with highs and lows, and inevitably shaped by the environment around them. Hollywood pressures, personal ambitions, and the allure of social connections created a constant tension. In this space, the lines between private loyalty and public image often blurred. And as Trevor would later reveal, some of those blurred lines included encounters that were more than just social interactions. The story takes a sharper turn when we consider the timing. Meghan's Hollywood ascent coincided with a period of increased social mobility for her and Trevor. Their marriage was navigating new challenges, the balance of career ambition, public attention, and private intimacy. It was a delicate equilibrium, and in these moments, small decisions had enormous impact. Trevor hints at nights where he observed dynamics that raised questions, moments that, while seemingly innocuous, hinted at patterns that would later define a significant chapter in Meghan's life. Among the glitz and glamour, certain individuals became particularly notable in Meghan's orbit. 5 hockey players, all on the same team, were part of this narrative. At first, their interactions with Meghan seemed coincidental, shared events, group parties, casual flirtations. But as Trevor observed, patterns began to emerge, moments of intimacy, private attention, and social maneuvering that went beyond mere coincidence. The significance of this, he stresses, is not merely about numbers or relationships, but about understanding the context. A young woman navigating ambition, desire, and influence in a world where every move mattered. Trevor's reflections are also candid about emotional complexity. He admits feelings of jealousy, uncertainty, and concern, balanced against admiration for Meghan's intelligence and social acumen. These conflicting emotions provide insight into the human dimension behind the scandalous allegations. He doesn't frame Meghan as purely victim or villain. Rather, he presents her as a complex figure, capable of both calculated action and genuine human connection. The audience is invited to wrestle with these contradictions alongside him. By the end of her early Hollywood phase, Meghan had established a reputation: intelligent, magnetic, ambitious, and, some would say, strategically flirtatious. Trevor observes that these traits, while valuable for career progression, also set the stage for the later controversial interactions with the hockey players. The pieces were in place. A combination of personal ambition, social skill, and the intense, often intrusive environment of Hollywood created a scenario ripe for scandal. And here, the tension begins to rise. Trevor recalls a specific party where Meghan's charm, her strategic navigation of the room, and the presence of the hockey players converged in a way that would later become legendary. The night was filled with laughter, drinks, and conversations that would later be scrutinized by everyone, from tabloids to fans to the public at large. At the time, it seemed like just another Hollywood evening. But hindsight, as Trevor suggests, casts everything in a different light. As we leave Meghan in her early Hollywood days, the stage is set for what comes next. Interactions with the hockey players that will define the scandal reveal hidden vulnerabilities, and ignite a story the public is still trying to comprehend. The environment, the choices, and the personalities involved all collided in a way that no one could have predicted. And yet, the trajectory was clear. These formative experiences were the prelude to a revelation that would shock Trevor, the hockey players, and the world itself. But what happened that night, Trevor claims, would make you see Meghan Markle in a way you never imagined. And it was only the beginning. The story takes on a sharper edge when the focus narrows to the 5 hockey players, the men whose names would, eventually, become inextricably linked with Meghan Markle in whispers, rumors, and later, revelations. To most of the public, they were just athletes, part of a team that performed on ice, celebrated for skill, stamina, and strategy. To Meghan, Trevor Engelson suggests, they were players in a different game entirely, a game of attraction, attention, and opportunity. At first glance, it might seem trivial. After all, Hollywood is full of encounters, actors, producers, athletes, socialites. But these were not random encounters. These were interactions repeated, observed, and calculated, occurring within a close-knit group that shared common spaces, interests, and activities. Trevor recalls noticing patterns early on, attention focused on Meghan that went beyond casual friendliness. Laughter, lingering glances, invitations extended multiple times, and moments of private attention that suggested an unspoken understanding. Trevor, as an insider, had a unique vantage point. He saw the dynamics unfold not as a gossip columnist might, but as someone living alongside Meghan, experiencing the complexities of her personal and social life firsthand. He noted the subtle shifts in her behavior, moments when she seemed exhilarated, moments when she seemed guarded, and moments when the line between flirtation and intimacy became indistinct. It is in these distinctions that the story takes on its most controversial form. The 5 hockey players were all on the same team, a fact that makes the story particularly striking. In sports, camaraderie is everything. Teams practice together, travel together, and form bonds that are both professional and personal. That Meghan would allegedly interact intimately with multiple members of a single team suggests a level of audacity, or social intelligence, that Trevor describes as simultaneously impressive and shocking. She navigated a delicate balance, maintaining charm and allure while engaging with men whose professional and personal lives were intertwined. One wrong move, Trevor notes, could have jeopardized her relationships, reputation, or both. Trevor remembers specific nights where Meghan's magnetism was undeniable. They would attend social gatherings, private parties, and dinners where the hockey players were present. Conversations were casual, laughter was easy, but beneath the surface, the energy was electric. Trevor recalls observing subtle dynamics, one player seeking her attention more persistently, another offering glances of admiration, a third maneuvering to be close during conversations. The tension was palpable, not only to him but, he suggests, to anyone paying attention. It was in these moments that the first rumors began to form. Hollywood, Trevor explains, is a world where perception can outweigh reality. A laugh shared in private, a moment of proximity, or a teasing comment can expand into a story that travels far beyond the initial encounter. But Trevor insists that these 5 players were different. They were not random admirers. Their interactions with Meghan, he claims, crossed into more intimate territory, forming a web of connections that would later be sensationalized by media and rumor alike. What made these interactions particularly remarkable, according to Trevor, was Meghan's awareness of the group dynamic. She did not engage with one in isolation while ignoring the others. There was a balance, a strategic distribution of attention, charm, and influence. Trevor recalls feeling a mixture of awe and unease, recognizing the skill required to navigate these interactions while simultaneously questioning the implications for trust and loyalty within their personal lives. The details of these alleged encounters are complex. Trevor hints at private moments during parties, whispered conversations in corners of rooms, and subtle signals that communicated interest and intimacy without overt displays. These were not public spectacles. They were calculated, private exchanges that spoke to a deeper understanding of human behavior, social dynamics, and personal ambition. Trevor describes witnessing the effect these moments had on the hockey players. Their focus, their energy, and in some cases, their desire to impress, to connect, and to be noticed in ways that went beyond the rink. But the most shocking part, Trevor emphasizes, is not just the interactions themselves, it is the context. The players were part of a single team, bound by loyalty, schedules, and shared goals. Engaging with multiple members in ways that went beyond friendship required both audacity and subtlety. It was a high-stakes game, one in which Meghan allegedly excelled, navigating the complexities without overtly drawing attention to herself, while simultaneously leaving an indelible mark on those involved. There is also an emotional component that Trevor does not shy away from. He describes a sense of tension, unease, and even jealousy, acknowledging the impact these interactions had on his own perception of trust and intimacy within his marriage. The story is not simply about scandal. It is about human emotion, the collision of desire and loyalty, and the psychological complexity of relationships under scrutiny. Trevor's account frames the hockey players not as villains or participants in a malicious scheme, but as individuals drawn into a pattern of social dynamics orchestrated, intentionally or not, by Meghan. Trevor also underscores the significance of repeated encounters. These were not one-off interactions. There were multiple nights, multiple settings, and multiple opportunities for connection. Each night added layers of complexity, memories, emotions, and implications that would resonate long after the events themselves. The repetition, combined with the team dynamic, created a situation ripe for misunderstanding, gossip, and ultimately, the scandal that would emerge in public discourse. In exploring the relationships with the hockey players, Trevor emphasizes the importance of subtlety. Meghan's alleged strategy was not overt manipulation, but rather an awareness of social influence, timing, and perception. She engaged with charm, humor, and attentiveness, creating a magnetic pull that was difficult for any individual to resist. The effect, as Trevor recalls, was both exhilarating and concerning, a combination that left him, and others, watching closely, trying to understand the implications. The chapter of Meghan's life involving the hockey players also intersects with her personal development. These encounters, Trevor suggests, were formative in ways that are not immediately obvious. They reveal aspects of ambition, social intelligence, and confidence that later played a role in her navigation of the royal spotlight. The experiences with the team were microcosms of larger patterns: influence, attention, and strategic social interaction. They were lessons learned in real time, under high stakes, and often at personal emotional cost. And then there is the infamous night, the one that would later be linked to the so-called wet pants incident. Trevor's account places this night within the context of the group dynamic. 5 players, private spaces, and a convergence of circumstances that created both intimacy and embarrassment. The moment, he says, was brief but unforgettable, a mix of humor, vulnerability, and shock. It was a scene that could have remained private, but in Hollywood, private moments rarely stay that way. This leads to a central tension. How much of what was observed and reported reflects reality, and how much is perception amplified by rumor? Trevor acknowledges that memory is imperfect, that interpretation matters, and that the narrative is shaped by both facts and emotional resonance. But even with these caveats, the story of Meghan's interactions with the 5 hockey players is undeniable in its impact, its intrigue, and its ability to fascinate anyone who hears it. By the end of this chapter, the audience understands the stakes. Meghan's charm, strategy, and presence created an environment in which multiple members of the same hockey team were drawn into interactions that were private, intense, and ultimately controversial. The combination of repeated encounters, group dynamics, and social intelligence created a situation rife for scandal, a scenario that Trevor Engelson witnessed, analyzed, and now recounts to the public. But what came next, the convergence of a single, unforgettable night, would change everything for Meghan, Trevor, and the hockey players, and no one could have predicted the fallout that followed. It was a night that would linger in memory. Not for glamour, not for achievement, but for an incident so bizarre, so human, that it would later be whispered about in gossip columns, social media threads, and private conversations alike. The wet pants moment. On the surface, it might seem trivial, a brief embarrassment, a funny anecdote. But as Trevor Engelson and those close to Meghan would later reveal, the incident was emblematic of far more than a single, awkward occurrence. It was a window into vulnerability, human error, and the intense scrutiny that would follow Meghan for years to come. Imagine the scene: a private gathering, laughter echoing through a high-end loft or hotel suite, music soft but insistent, and Meghan moving gracefully through a room filled with people whose attention she naturally commanded. Among them, the 5 hockey players, each absorbed by their admiration, curiosity, and perhaps subtle infatuation. The setting was intimate but charged, social but complicated, and every glance, every step, every gesture carried the weight of perception. Trevor Engelson recalls that night in vivid detail. From the outside, it appeared ordinary, a social evening with friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. But moments rarely remain ordinary in a world where reputation is currency and scrutiny is relentless. Meghan had been moving through the room, charming, laughing, and engaging with multiple people at once. And then it happened, a sudden slip, a mishap so minor in its physicality but so explosive in its social consequences. A wet stain, an unexpected moment of embarrassment that instantly drew attention, whispered commentary, and the laughter of observers. At first, the reaction was muted. Close friends and partners like Trevor instinctively stepped in, offering help, covering the situation with quiet discretion. But Hollywood is rarely kind to mistakes, and even private incidents can be magnified in ways that are disproportionate to their original context. Trevor emphasizes that this was not a staged incident, not a publicity stunt, and not the type of calculated move Meghan often employed. This was a moment of vulnerability, unplanned and uncontained. The emotional stakes were immediate. For Meghan, the incident was mortifying. For Trevor, it was both shocking and surreal, blending empathy, humor, and concern in equal measure. And for the hockey players present, it added another layer to an already complex social interaction. How do you respond to charm disrupted by accident? How do you navigate attraction, curiosity, and decorum in a moment that is intimate but accidental? The answers, Trevor suggests, reveal as much about human behavior as the incident itself. What made the moment so memorable, Trevor notes, was how Meghan reacted. Rather than retreating or succumbing to shame, she demonstrated a combination of humor, grace, and quick thinking. She laughed, acknowledged the mishap, and reframed the situation with charm that simultaneously diffused tension and maintained social control. It was a subtle but powerful demonstration of her social intelligence, a reminder that even in moments of vulnerability, she could navigate perception with skill. Yet, as anyone familiar with Hollywood knows, perception is reality. The incident, minor though it was in execution, became fodder for speculation. People whispered, laughed discreetly, and replayed the moment in their minds. In Hollywood, where private moments are rarely private and rumors spread like wildfire, the wet pants incident began to take on a life of its own. It was no longer just about the accident. It was about Meghan's ability to manage it, the reactions of those around her, and the narrative that would inevitably emerge. Trevor's account also highlights the underlying tension between humor and judgment. On one hand, the moment was funny, a classic human mishap that anyone could experience. On the other hand, in a world obsessed with image and control, it became a test of reputation. Meghan's handling of the situation, Trevor insists, revealed her ability to balance vulnerability and poise, human imperfection and social mastery. It was a microcosm of the broader challenges she would face as her life transitioned from Hollywood ambition to royal scrutiny. The presence of the 5 hockey players adds further complexity. Each of them witnessed, interpreted, and reacted to the incident in their own way. Some were amused, some concerned, some intrigued. Trevor notes that the dynamics shifted subtly in the room. Attention recalibrated, social energy redirected, and unspoken connections subtly altered. The incident became a touchstone, an event that would later be referenced, exaggerated, and mythologized in ways that blurred the line between fact and narrative. Emotionally, for Trevor, this was a moment that crystallized his dual role, partner, and observer. He had to navigate concern for Meghan, manage the social fallout, and process his own feelings about the incident. Jealousy, protectiveness, and empathy collided in a mixture that left him both exhausted and fascinated. This, he reflects, was part of the larger challenge of being married to someone whose life, private, public, intimate, and social, was increasingly complex and scrutinized. What makes the wet pants moment so compelling, Trevor explains, is that it is symbolic. It represents the intersection of personal vulnerability and public perception, desire and judgment, intimacy and exposure. One small physical mishap becomes a narrative device, a point of intrigue, and a catalyst for rumor. It is human, relatable, and, in a world obsessed with perfection, devastatingly memorable. Trevor also emphasizes that the incident was a turning point, not in the sense of scandal alone, but in the way it affected social dynamics. After that night, interactions with the hockey players subtly changed. Attention sharpened, behavior adjusted, and unspoken tensions emerged. What had previously been flirtation or casual engagement now carried layers of complexity. The room's energy shifted, and Meghan's social mastery was both tested and reaffirmed. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect, according to Trevor, is how this moment was remembered. It wasn't just a physical mishap. It became a narrative touchstone, referenced in private conversations, exaggerated in retelling, and eventually woven into the larger story that would later capture public attention. Humor, embarrassment, and social skill collided in a single event that would continue to ripple across relationships and reputations. The incident also serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of human interaction. Even someone as poised, strategic, and socially intelligent as Meghan can experience moments of vulnerability that defy control. And when those moments occur in high-stakes social environments, surrounded by admirers, colleagues, and potential allies, the consequences extend far beyond the immediate embarrassment. The story becomes part of a larger narrative, a chapter in a life already under intense observation. By the end of that night, Trevor recalls, there was laughter, whispered conversation, and a subtle recalibration of attention. But beneath the surface, the dynamics had shifted. Meghan's charm remained, but the hockey players' perceptions, the room's energy, and the social stakes were now altered in ways that would echo in the stories retold in private and eventually in public. And so, the wet pants incident, while minor in its physicality, became pivotal in its social and emotional implications. It marked a moment where vulnerability, charm, and perception collided, a microcosm of the tensions, scandals, and human dramas that would define Meghan's path. It was brief, unexpected, and unforgettable. But what Meghan and Trevor did not know at the time was that this small, seemingly contained mishap would become the catalyst for rumors, public fascination, and a narrative that no one could control, one that would entangle her with the hockey players in ways that would leave a lasting mark on her story. The night ended, laughter subsided, and the room emptied. But the incident, minor as it seemed, was far from over. It had planted seeds of curiosity, speculation, and intrigue that would grow into a storm of scandal. And what came next, the interactions, the revelations, and the secrets, would shock everyone involved. Trevor Engelson had always been a quiet observer, a man who preferred reflection over spectacle. But after years of witnessing Meghan Markle's life from the inside, the charm, the ambition, the private decisions, he realized that some truths could no longer remain unspoken. The revelations he would eventually share are not about revenge. They are about context, insight, and a perspective that the world has never seen. The intimate, complicated, and often contradictory life of a woman the public thinks they know. Trevor's account begins not with scandal, but with emotion. He speaks of love, of connection, and of moments of genuine intimacy that existed before the rumors, the parties, and the headlines. He recalls days when he and Meghan shared laughter, dreams, and plans for a future together, a world where ambition and partnership intertwined seamlessly. These recollections are critical, he stresses, because they demonstrate the humanity behind the headlines. Meghan, in his eyes, was never simply a celebrity or a duchess. She was a person navigating love, desire, and the pressures of a life increasingly public. but the intimacy also revealed complexities. Trevor noticed early on that Meghan's social interactions often carried undertones that went beyond casual connection. There were men who lingered a little too long in her orbit, moments of flirtation that seemed effortless and instinctual, and subtle manipulations that were difficult to identify in real time. Among these interactions were those with the 5 hockey players, the same men whose attention, admiration, and subtle pursuit would later become a central point of intrigue. Trevor observed the patterns, the repeated encounters, and the calculated charm, recognizing that something was unfolding that went beyond ordinary social engagement. Trevor's revelations are rooted in proximity. He saw the private moments, the glances, and the unspoken communications that would later fuel speculation. He recounts instances where Meghan would charm a room, moving seamlessly between individuals, commanding attention while maintaining control of perception. He describes how the hockey players responded, one captivated by her wit, another by her confidence, a third by her playful teasing. These interactions, though seemingly casual, were layered with emotional nuance, subtle power dynamics, and the thrill of human attraction. What makes Trevor's revelations compelling is not simply the accounts themselves, but the insight into Meghan's mindset. She was ambitious, yes, but also aware of the consequences of perception. She understood the delicate balance between allure and discretion, between intimacy and strategy. Trevor recalls moments where he saw her calculating the effect of a gesture, a glance, or a conversation, small actions that had outsized consequences in the interconnected social world of Hollywood. The most explosive of Trevor's revelations, however, concerns the nights when Meghan's interactions with the hockey players went beyond social banter. He describes private encounters that, while brief, were charged with intimacy, flirtation, and subtle seduction. These were not public acts, not spectacles to impress, but private moments that revealed desires, curiosity, and agency. Trevor emphasizes that these were human choices, made in environments where attention, power, and opportunity collided. Trevor's recounting is meticulous. He provides context for each encounter, the setting, the social dynamics, the energy in the room. He recalls the minor yet telling behaviors, a lingering touch, a meaningful glance, laughter shared in private corners, the way attention shifted among the group. To an outsider, these might appear trivial. To someone observing from within, they are critical pieces of a narrative puzzle. Emotional stakes are ever present in Trevor's revelations. He reflects on the complexity of jealousy, trust, and personal morality. Watching someone you love engage with others in ways that blur lines is emotionally taxing. Trevor admits to feelings of confusion, concern, and heartbreak, juxtaposed against admiration for Meghan's intelligence, charisma, and social skill. The tension is palpable, love intertwined with suspicion, loyalty tested by proximity, and desire complicated by human behavior. The impact of these private interactions extended beyond personal emotion. Trevor explains how they influenced public perception, reputation, and the emerging narrative around Meghan. Even minor interactions, when filtered through gossip, rumor, and later media coverage, could become sensationalized. The way Meghan navigated these dynamics reveals both her social intelligence and her understanding of perception, a skill that would later serve her in the most public of arenas. Trevor's revelations also highlight the repeated patterns of engagement. It wasn't a single night or a single encounter. It was a series of moments, each contributing to a complex tapestry of interactions. These moments reinforced bonds, created tension, and, inadvertently, fueled the narrative that would eventually surface in tabloids and online discussion. The consistency, he notes, is what made the story so compelling, so believable, and ultimately so scandalous when revealed. Perhaps the most striking part of Trevor's account is how these revelations tie into Meghan's overall narrative. He suggests that these early patterns, flirtation, strategic charm, and social maneuvering, were formative experiences, teaching lessons about influence, attention, and control. They were microcosms of the broader strategies she would later employ in public life, whether in Hollywood or as a royal figure. In other words, these private moments were training grounds for navigating a world where perception was as critical as reality. Trevor is careful to distinguish between observation and judgment. He does not frame Meghan's choices as malicious or reckless. Instead, he emphasizes agency, awareness, and human complexity. The interactions were consensual, human, and, in many ways, inevitable in a social environment where attraction and opportunity intersected. What makes them remarkable is not the morality of the choices, but the broader implications for relationships, reputation, and narrative construction. In addition to the private details, Trevor's revelations touch on public reaction, anticipation, and eventual rumor circulation. He recalls hearing murmurs, reading speculation, and understanding how even minor incidents could explode into stories that distort reality. The hockey players, unaware of the eventual attention their interactions would attract, were part of a private drama that would later become public fascination. Trevor observed the interplay between private reality and public perception in real time, giving his account an authenticity rarely matched by secondhand reporting. Trevor's reflections end with a moment of foreshadowing. He hints at consequences that would ripple beyond his marriage, beyond Meghan's immediate social circle, and into the broader public consciousness. What happened that night, he says, was just the beginning. The truth is more complicated than people imagine, and the fallout would affect more than just us. The statement is deliberate, creating tension, curiosity, and a sense of impending revelation that demands attention. But what Trevor reveals next? The specific details of interactions with the hockey players and how they intertwined with both public perception and private dynamics would shock even those who thought they knew Meghan Markle intimately. The stage is set for scandal, insight, and a narrative that no one could have predicted. And what came next would not just alter his perception of Meghan. It would redefine the story that the world thought it knew, leaving everyone involved grappling with truths, consequences, and secrets that could no longer be contained. To understand Meghan Markle's early Hollywood experiences and the context for her interactions with the hockey players, you have to understand the culture that surrounded her. Hollywood parties are not just social gatherings. They are ecosystems of ambition, influence, and social maneuvering, where every conversation, glance, and laugh carries potential consequences. They are spaces where careers can be made or destroyed, reputations are tested, and desires collide with opportunity. Trevor Engelson describes Hollywood parties as high-stakes arenas. They are glamorous on the surface, glittering lights, designer clothing, champagne flowing freely. But beneath the surface lies a network of social rules, unspoken hierarchies, and strategic behavior. Every guest is calculating. Everyone wants to be seen, remembered, and associated with the right people. And Meghan, according to Trevor, understood this world instinctively. She could move through a crowded room, commanding attention, creating connections, and leaving an impression that lingered long after the party ended. Part of the Hollywood party culture is unpredictability. Celebrities, athletes, producers, and influencers often mix in ways that would be unimaginable outside these walls. Trevor recalls nights where chance encounters led to private conversations, flirtation, or unexpected alliances. One moment, you're laughing in a crowded room. The next, you're sharing an intimate exchange that, while fleeting, carries emotional weight. These moments, small as they may seem, were formative in Meghan's social education, teaching her how to navigate desire, attention, and power. Alcohol, charisma, and social expectation all played a role. Trevor notes that people often misinterpret what happens at parties like these. What looks like casual flirtation may be a strategic move. What seems like spontaneous intimacy may be a carefully navigated social interaction. Meghan, in these settings, was both participant and observer, aware of how her actions could influence perception, create opportunities, or ignite rumors. The stakes were high, and every interaction was laden with potential. The presence of the hockey players within this culture adds complexity. Trevor recalls specific parties where all 5 players were present, each aware of the other's interactions with Meghan, each attempting subtly to capture her attention. In the chaos of Hollywood's social life, these moments of competition and desire were amplified, creating tension that was palpable even to observers. Trevor describes how he would watch from the sidelines, sometimes amused, sometimes concerned, understanding that these interactions were about more than attraction. They were about social positioning and influence. Hollywood parties also serve as training grounds for social intelligence. Meghan, Trevor suggests, learned to read rooms, assess intentions, and adjust her behavior in real time. She could detect subtle shifts in attention, anticipate reactions, and employ charm strategically. These skills, honed in environments that demanded constant social navigation, would later serve her in more public arenas, including royal engagements. But in these early Hollywood days, the stakes were immediate: success, desire, and reputation all intertwined in a single night. Trevor's accounts emphasize the interplay between spontaneity and calculation. While it may have seemed that Meghan was naturally magnetic, her charm was also deliberate. She knew how to engage, when to withdraw, and how to maintain control over perception. At parties, where attention is currency, these skills are invaluable. And when combined with beauty, wit, and intelligence, they make for interactions that are both mesmerizing and complex, capable of drawing admiration, desire, and speculation simultaneously. But the culture was also unforgiving. Hollywood is quick to judge, slow to forgive, and always eager to narrate stories that are more dramatic than reality. Trevor notes that minor incidents, easily dismissed in private, could become legendary in retelling. One laugh too loud, one lingering glance, one casual touch could be reinterpreted, exaggerated, and shared in ways that no participant could control. It was an environment where mistakes were amplified and charm could be weaponized. The wet pants incident, for example, while minor, occurred within this high-stakes ecosystem. At a private gathering, laughter, embarrassment, and curiosity intertwined. Observers, even those sympathetic, could not help but notice the drama. And in Hollywood, where stories grow legs on their own, such moments were rarely contained. Trevor's recounting emphasizes that these parties were not innocent. They were theaters where personal dynamics, desire, and social maneuvering played out in real time, often with long-lasting implications. Trevor also reflects on the psychological impact of this culture. For Meghan, constant attention and evaluation were part of daily life. Every move was observed, every word analyzed. The pressure to perform socially, to charm effortlessly, and to navigate potential scandals required immense skill. Trevor describes moments where he watched her manage these pressures with poise, yet also moments where fatigue, frustration, or vulnerability would peek through. These humanizing moments are critical to understanding how she operated, particularly when navigating interactions with the hockey players. The culture also created opportunities for rapid escalation of rumor and speculation. What begins as a minor flirtation could quickly be interpreted as a scandal. A single interaction could be reframed in countless ways, amplified by gossip, social media, and the natural human appetite for drama. Trevor notes that this is the environment in which the alleged interactions with the hockey players gained significance. The context of Hollywood parties, the competition, the attention, the pressure, transformed otherwise ordinary social interactions into something far more consequential. And yet, Trevor emphasizes, this was not a world of reckless abandon. Meghan was strategic, aware, and often in control. She understood how to manage attention, how to redirect energy, and how to maintain an image of grace, even amidst chaos. But even the most skilled individuals can be caught off guard. Unplanned moments, like the wet pants incident, could disrupt careful management of perception, revealing vulnerability in a world where it was rarely tolerated. This is why Hollywood party culture is essential to understanding the story. It is the backdrop against which ambition, desire, and scandal collide. It is the arena in which Meghan learned to navigate attention, charm, and social strategy. It is the crucible that shaped behaviors, influenced decisions, and set the stage for the interactions that would later become infamous. Without this context, the events with the hockey players and their subsequent amplification cannot be fully understood. Trevor concludes this chapter by reflecting on the duality of the culture: exhilarating, glamorous, and intoxicating on one hand, demanding, high pressure, and unpredictable on the other. For Meghan, each party was a lesson, each encounter a test, each interaction a potential narrative. And for the five hockey players, it was an introduction to a woman whose charm, intelligence, and social mastery would leave an indelible impression, one that would echo long after the night ended. But what happened after these parties? The private decisions, the intimate encounters, and the secrets that were kept would escalate the story beyond Hollywood and into a level of public fascination no one could have predicted. What came next would ensure that the interactions, the rumors, and the minor incidents would converge into a scandal that would follow Meghan Markle for years. The private side of Hollywood is a world few truly understand. Parties, glitz, and public charm only scratch the surface. Behind closed doors, interactions often intensify, emotions flare, boundaries blur, and human desire intersects with social strategy in ways that can be both exhilarating and dangerous. For Meghan Markle, this world was not merely a backdrop. It was a crucible that tested her charm, intelligence, and instincts, particularly in the context of the hockey players. Trevor Engelson recalls that after initial encounters at parties and gatherings, private interactions began to take on a more charged quality. These were not public flirtations or casual conversations. They were moments where Meghan and the players were alone, even if briefly, and the dynamic shifted. The magnetic energy that had been observable in social settings now became more intimate, more personal, and more loaded with tension. Each encounter carried emotional weight, requiring careful navigation of attraction, privacy, and discretion. The progression was subtle at first. A shared joke in a private room, a lingering glance during a quiet moment, a conversation that wandered from casual topics to personal revelations. Trevor observed that these moments, while fleeting, created an intricate web of emotional connection, curiosity, and attraction. The players responded with a mixture of admiration, desire, and intrigue, sometimes playful, sometimes intense. The intensity of these private encounters was, in Trevor's words, magnetic but volatile, intoxicating but dangerous. Meghan, according to Trevor, was acutely aware of the stakes. She understood that private encounters could amplify desire, influence perception, and shift social dynamics. Yet she also embraced the human element. Flirtation, intimacy, and connection were not just strategic tools. They were experiences, moments of thrill, and explorations of social energy. This duality, control and spontaneity, defined the intensification of private encounters. One particular series of interactions stands out. Trevor recounts nights where Meghan would invite one of the hockey players to step aside from the group, to talk, to laugh, to share in moments removed from the crowd.